At the beginning of this year, I started live streaming most Sundays, and while I'm still getting to the grips with the software, I've already started looking into ways to make the stream look better. Good transitions between scenes can make the stream look smoother and well organized, so adding custom transitions seemed like a great idea. In this video, we're going to make a custom track matte stinger using Blender. We will be covering the absolute peasant level animation and compositing in Blender, and adding the stinger in OBS. If you want to follow along, I will leave the blend files and output as a free download on my Patreon. You can find the link in the description. I'd also like to take a second to thank my first two patrons, Patrick Walter and Mike from Net1 Videos. Thank you, you absolute legends you. If you already know what the track matte stinger is, you can jump ahead to the chapter, Making the Stinger. Otherwise, hang around and I'll explain what we're trying to achieve. The final stinger will have an animated overlay, which will flash across the screen. As the overlay travels from left to right, the new scene will be revealed until the overlay leaves the screen and the new scene is completely visible. To do this, we'll need to generate a video file with two components. These can be side by side or stacked on top of each other. In this case, I will be stacking them. The top half of the video is the overlay. This is what will get shown on top of everything. It has a transparent background, so everything under it will show through. The bottom half is the track matte. This will not be visible, but acts as a mask for the new scene. Where the mask is pure black, the new scene will be completely invisible, and the old scene will show through. Where the mask is pure white, the new scene will be completely visible, and the old scene will be hidden. If it helps, imagine this box you are looking at is your screen. If you're looking from the top down, this is the way the components are stacked in it. If you have ever worked with layers in Photoshop or GIMP, this should be familiar. It's not 100% accurate to the way the software implements it, but it's close enough that we can work with it. Okay, now that we know what we want to achieve, let's jump into Blender. I'm using 3.1 here, but you can follow along even in 2.9 or 2.8. I'm going to start by setting my output properties. So I'm going to jump here, where there's this little printer icon, and check the resolution. I stream in 1920 by 1080, so this is fine. I also use 30 frames per second, so I need to change this. I also want my stinger to last for about half a second, so 30 division by 2 gives me 15 frames. So we set that there. Okay. We can leave the output settings as they are for now, but one last thing we need to do is change the film to transparent. If we try to render now, the background is grayed out, so we cannot have any transparency. But if we go to Film and enable transparent, if we render again, we can see this grid, which means that this will be a transparency. So we're good to go. Okay, I'm going to delete these things because we won't need them, and select the camera. First thing we want to do is align the camera with the y-axis, which is this green line. So let's go to Alt-R to clear the rotation and Alt-G to clear the position. Now the camera is at the origin. To align it with the y-axis, I'm going to rotate it around the x-axis, which is this red line. So RX90. And I'm going to move it back using the G key and Y to constrain it. There should be fine. Now, I don't want the camera to have any perspective distortion, so I'm going to the camera settings and changing it to an orthographic camera. And we're just starting our stinger. Going to add a plane and rotate it to face the camera. So again, RX90. Now, if I press the backtick key, I can go to the camera view, and we can see our box right there. We could use pretty much anything as long as it's large enough to cover the height of the screen, but let's make it a bit fancier. So I'm going to start by scaling it so it's larger than the view area. Remember that only the stuff which is within this dotted line will be rendered. Anything outside of that box will not be visible. Okay, let's jump into edit mode by pressing tab and selecting loop cut. So I want to make a few vertical cuts. And a horizontal cut right over there. Okay, go back to select mode. And we're going to make sure that the middle vertices are selected. Then press G so we can grab them, and X to constrain them on a horizontal path. And we're just going to move them out a little. So we have an arrow shape. Next, I'm going to press 3 to go into face selection. And I'm selecting a face by left-clicking it. You can also select multiples by holding down Shift as I do that. Press delete and delete faces. And we have our arrow shape. Okay, and we can tab out of edit mode again. So let's give it a material so that we can see what we're doing. Just clicking on the material properties here, new, and giving it a red color. There we go. Now we can't see it right now because we're in solid mode, but if we go to material preview, we can see the colors, and that's enough to start with. Okay, next we want to animate this going from out here to here. So very simply what we're going to do is bring up the animation timeline here. Let's close it in. We're going to work within these frames from 1 to 15. And we're going to move this all the way out of the screen. Let's make sure we're on the first frame and press N to bring up the item properties. Hover over the location and press I to set a keyframe. You will see that a little diamond appeared over here. That means that this frame has a keyframe for the location. Next, we're going to jump to the last frame, and we're going to move the arrow all the way over the other side. There should be enough. Okay, this has turned orange, which means that there has been a change from the last keyframe, but it's not set yet. So we're going to hit I again while hovering over it, and we have a second keyframe over here. If we play this now, we'll have some movement. Now, depending on your animation, you might want to have different interpolations. By default, it's going to be a Bezier, which means that it's going to accelerate and then slow down. In this case, I want to have a smooth linear movement, so I'm just going to press T while I'm on the timeline and selecting linear. You can also add other little animation effects. For example, let's give it a bounce just to see what that looks like. Not terribly useful here, but it might come in handy sometime. Let's put that back to linear. And we have our overlay animation. Let's name this overlay. And we can start working on our matte. So we're going to add the matte in exactly the same way. We're basically going to do a plane. And this time we're going to parent it to the overlay by clicking Object Properties, Relations, and selecting overlay. Now what this does is constrain the new object to the overlay so that wherever that goes, the new object follows. Now right now they're clipping because they're in the same location. So let's move it back a little. Okay, let's go back to camera view. And I want to make sure that in the last frame, this is covering all of the screen. So I'm just going to jump over to the last frame, tab into edit mode, and make sure point selection is selected. Again, I can always press 1 to go back to that. Select these two, G to move them, X to constrain them, and I'm just going to move them so it's larger than the screen. And we can tab out of it again. So if we look at the animation now, we've got the overlay coming through and the matte covering the screen. So again, let's rename this so we don't get confused. And we can also give it a material. Now, as we mentioned before, the matte needs to be pure white to work as a mask. So what we're going to do is add a new material. Make sure that the base color is pure white. And to make it really bright, I'm also going to give it an emission color, setting the strength all the way up to 100. Okay, that will ensure that it's as bright as it can be. Okay, we're almost ready to render our animation. One last thing is missing, the lights. So if we go to the render preview here, we'll see that everything is very dark except for this, which we set up to be very bright. So what we're going to do is just add an area light. Rotate it in the same way that we did the others, so it's facing down the y-axis. And moving it behind the camera. We're also going to need to grow it a little because it's quite small. Okay, from the light properties, we're going to bump up its strength, let's say 200. Or even 300 will do here. No, I think it can stand to be a bit higher. That should do it. Okay, and now we're ready to render the animation. What we want to do here is render it in two separate parts. So we'll want to render the overlay on its own and the matte on its own. So what we're going to do is use this option to disable the render. So if we render it as it is now, we're going to get both of them. But if we disable this in the renders, we're going to get the overlay on its own. And likewise, if we flip this over, we're going to get the matte on its own. Okay, so I'm going to our output options, making sure that PNG is selected and RGBA color is activated. And I'm going to render the overlay first. Let's create a new folder in here. And render animation. That's one done. Enable this and disable this. And almost forgot to change the folder name. New folder. And that's also done. And if we open this, we'll see that we've got 15 images, one per frame. Okay, now we can start to composite them. What I'm going to do is save this first, and then save as a new file. I'm going to call it stringer demo composite. The reason is that I'm going to want to change the rendering settings, and I want to be able to go back to the main file in case I need to change anything. Okay, now we're going to stack the two images on top of each other. So let's go here to the Y resolution in output and multiply by 2. Next, we're going to want to create a WebM video. So in the file format, pick FFmpeg video and expand encoding. Here we can pick the WebM container, and under video codec, pick WebM VP9. You can also throw that into high quality. Okay. So let's jump into compositing and tick use nodes. Right now we have just these two, which are the render layers, which we'll not be using, and the composite, which will be our final output. So let's remove this, and let's add a viewer node so that we can see what we're doing. Okay. Now let's import our first set of images, which will be the overlay. Image, open, you can press A to select everything here, and open image. And there is our overlay. Better rename this so we don't get confused. Now if we connect these two, we can see our overlay in the background. Let's also bring in our matte. And now we're going to need to stack them together. Let's make some space over here. The way to combine these two is to use an alpha over node. So let's add that in. We can stick this into the bottom slot. And we can stick this into the top one. And we'll have to replace these. There we go. Let's zoom out here to see what's going on. Now the problem here is that they're both stacked on top of each other, so we're going to have to move them. And we can do that by putting a transform node on each one of them. Let me just make some space over here. Oh, I thought I had renamed this one. Okay, let's add the transform node. And we can just drop it in there and it will connect them. Now what we want to do with the mat is to drive it to the lower half. So let's give it 1080 divided by 2 negative. And that's shifted down. And we're going to copy this over, Shift D, drop it in there, and change this to positive 540. Okay, if we do a quick test render of this, we have them stacked on top of each other as we wanted. Now there is a problem here because we need this part to be black. So we're just going to add it now. Let's minimize these. So we're going to need to add an image again. And this time we're going to generate one rather than using one which we have already. So click New. And we want one which is 1920 by 180, which is our original resolution. Don't want alpha, and we just want to make sure it's solid black. Yep. Okay. And let's call it matte background. Okay, we can just add another alpha over node. Make sure that the matte is at the bottom and the background is in the top one. There we go. Let's stack them on top of each other, and this area is now black. Now what I want to make sure is this white enough? I am not entirely sure. So what I shall do is add a color collection node. Actually, let's go for a brightness contrast and brighten this all the way up. Can it get any whiter? Maybe. I don't know. Let's throw in some gamma correction as well. Not exposure, gamma correction. All the way up to 10. Yeah, this should do it. Okay, so we have this part which is whiter than white, which will give us the matte, and this part will be black, which will show the old scene through. Okay. Now, I know some people can find nodes confusing, but the way they work is really like an assembly, like a factory with different stations. So it takes the inputs, does an operation on them, and then produces an output. So in this case, the overlay, for example, is just transformed, which we're doing to move it up. Then we're using alpha over to assemble it with the rest of the stuff, and then throwing it into the output. Same with the matte, we're brightening it up, adding gamma correction, then using alpha over to assemble it with the matte background, then moving it down, and then assembling it with the overlay with the alpha over, and again off to the composite. So if we render this now, let's check the output folder, just make it temp folder. Yeah. Now before we render, just make sure that RGBA is selected here, otherwise you will not get any transparency. And let's hit it. Render animation. Okay, that's done and we can jump into OBS. Okay, once you're in OBS, we can just add a stringer by going to Scene Transitions and picking Add Stinger. Let's call it Stinger Demo. Make some space here, browse, go to the TMP folder where we created our video file. And we can pick it from there. So we need to pick Use a Track Matte and same file stacked. And let's see what happens. Yeah, that seems to work. Let's try it. Yep, that worked. Okay, so now we know how to create a stinger, animate things in Blender, and use compositing. So I think that's enough for one video. If you're interested in more content, you can check out some playlists over that side, and hope to see you again soon. Bye!